Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. I thought it was just a love potion. Now she's imprinted on me forever. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Lee Mercer stepped off his ship and into the chaotic neon jungle of Eden Prime, a city that catered to every desire imaginable, no matter how wild. The air was thick with the scent of exotic spices, synthetic pheromones, and the electric hum of pulsating lights overhead. It was the kind of place where credits flowed freely, memories were made, and more often, erased, and where even the most careful men could find themselves waking up with regrets. Lyall wasn't looking for regrets. He was just looking to unwind, maybe forget about the latest botched trade deal that had left him with barely enough fuel to make the next jump. He wasn't a reckless man, not anymore, but Eden Prime had a way of making a man loosen his grip on control. The bar he stepped into was called the Siren's Call, a place known for its intoxicating drinks and even more intoxicating company. It was packed tonight, filled with travelers, smugglers, corporate big shots slumming it for the thrill, and aliens of all kinds. The music was low and rhythmic, designed to lull patrons into an easy state of indulgence, and the dancers swayed like they had all the time in the universe. Lyall took a seat at the bar, signaling the bartender for something strong but smooth. He wasn't looking to drink himself into a stupor, just to take the edge off. That was when he noticed her. She was sitting alone at the far end of the bar, and she had the kind of presence that made people steal glances whether they meant to or not. Her skin was a soft shade of jade, a rare hue even among the exotic species that roamed the stars. Golden eyes flickered under the shifting light, sharp and assessing, as if she saw more than what was on the surface. She wasn't dressed like the working girls or the high-rolling socialites that often filled this place. No, she carried herself differently, like someone who wasn't here to impress anyone. That alone made her interesting. Lyall wasn't the type to get caught up in a stare, but when she turned and met his gaze, it felt less like an accident and more like a silent challenge. He'd seen that look before, the kind that said she wasn't interested in small talk, in polite conversation, in wasting time. He liked that. He liked women who didn't play games, who said what they wanted and took it. So when she gestured for him to join her, he didn't hesitate. "I don't waste words on introductions," she said as soon as he sat down, her voice smooth and confident. "If you're sitting here, it's because you're interested." Lyall smirked, leaning back slightly. "Is that how it works?" "That's how I work," she corrected, sipping from a glass filled with something dark and thick. "What about you? You the type to dance around what you want, or the type to take it?" He laughed, shaking his head. "I'm the type to know what's worth taking." She smiled at that, and it wasn't a coy smile, or the kind meant to lure a man in with false promises. It was knowing, amused. She liked the answer, and that was enough for Lyall to know he was exactly where he wanted to be tonight. They talked, not about the meaningless details of their lives, not about where they came from or where they were going, but about the things that mattered in a place like this. What they wanted, what they could offer each other. She was sharp, quick-witted, uninterested in pretense, and there was something deeply refreshing about that. Most women in places like this either tried too hard to seem mysterious or gave themselves away too easily. Becca, as she finally told him her name, didn't need either approach. At some point, she slid a small vial across the table toward him, a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "You ever had one of these?" she asked. Lyall picked it up, examining the deep purple liquid inside. "What is it?" "A love potion," she said with just the right amount of mockery in her tone, or something close enough. "It heightens attraction, lowers inhibitions, makes for a more memorable night." He wasn't an idiot. He knew better than to drink something an alien woman handed him without question. But he'd also been around the block enough times to know that in places like this, these things were harmless. They were common in pleasure cities, A little enhancement for those looking to make a fleeting moment more intense. He'd had a few in his time, back when he was younger and less cautious, and they had always been nothing more than a brief thrill. So he tilted the vial back and swallowed it without hesitation. It tasted sweet, like something rich and decadent, and he barely had time to set the empty vial down before Becca's lips were on his. What followed was a blur of heat and movement, of tangled limbs, and whispered words spoken in languages he didn't even fully understand. They barely made it out of the bar before they were pressed against the nearest wall, hands roaming, mouths searching. Somehow they ended up in a sleek high-rise suite overlooking the endless neon sprawl of Eden Prime, and for the first time in what felt like years, Lyell let himself stop thinking. He let himself give in, let himself enjoy the moment for exactly what it was. No obligations, no regrets, just two people taking what they wanted from each other. The night was long, filled with moments that blurred together in ways that made it impossible to tell where one ended and the next began. Becca was wild and uninhibited, as confident in her body as she was in her words, and Lyell met her with equal intensity. He didn't care about the details. What mattered was that she wasn't just another forgettable face in another forgettable night. She was different, and in that moment, that was enough. But when he woke up the next morning, groggy and tangled in silk sheets, something was very, very wrong. Becca was sitting at the edge of the bed, watching him with those golden eyes, the same knowing smile playing on her lips. "You're finally awake," she murmured. Lyell ran a hand over his face, pushing himself up. "Yeah, hell of a night." She nodded. "Yes, and now you're mine." He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Cute. You don't strike me as the clingy type." "I'm not," she said simply. But that wasn't just an aphrodisiac. Lie. That was an imprinting serum. Something in her tone made his amusement flicker into something colder, sharper. He frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. What the hell is that supposed to mean? She stood, stretching with the kind of languid confidence that suggested she had all the time in the world. Then she turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable but undeniably certain. "It means," she said, stepping closer, "that you belong to me now, human." Lyell sat there blinking as his brain sluggishly tried to process what Becca had just said. He wasn't new to waking up in strange places after a long night, but this was different. He could feel something off, something lingering beneath his skin like an invisible thread, pulling him toward the jade-skinned woman, standing over him with that maddeningly calm expression. "You belong to me now." The words echoed in his head, bouncing around in a way that didn't sit right. His first instinct was to laugh, to shake it off as some kind of morning-after joke, but there was something about the way she said it, so certain, so matter-of-fact, that made his usual cocky response die in his throat. He rubbed at his temples, trying to force his still-waking brain to focus. "Okay, let's rewind a second," he said, voice rough from the night before. "You're telling me that stuff I drank. What, it wasn't just a fun little enhancer. It did what exactly?" Becca sat down on the bed beside him, folding one leg over the other, with an ease that suggested she had no intention of leaving anytime soon. "It created a bond," she explained, her tone patient, like she was explaining something as simple as gravity. "A permanent biological link between us. You and I are now connected in a way that cannot be undone." Lyell let out a sharp exhale, dragging a hand down his face. He'd heard some crazy things in his time. He'd been to planets where people claimed to be able to see into the future, had dealt with species whose entire language was based on scent, had once even encountered a trader who swore he could talk to his ship. But this was insane. "Permanent," he repeated, looking at her like she had just declared herself the empress of the galaxy. "As in forever. No takebacks." "No takebacks," Becca confirmed, tilting her head slightly. "The serum ensures that our biochemical structures are synchronized. You'll feel my emotions, I'll feel yours. We are bound. It is considered sacred among my people." Lyell laughed. but there was no humor in it. Great, just great. So what you're saying is I had a one-night stand, and now I'm married. Becca shrugged. If that's how humans see it. Lyle pushed himself up from the bed, pacing the sleek floor of the high-rise suite as his mind worked at hyperspeed. He refused to accept this. There had to be a way out. Okay, so let's say I don't want to be part of this bond, he said, running his fingers through his hair. What's the fix? What's the cure? She watched him with the same unreadable expression, completely unbothered by his reaction. There is no cure. The words hit like a fist to the gut. Lyle stopped mid-step, turning to face her fully. You're telling me I'm stuck like this? Becca finally let out a small sigh, as if she had expected this exact reaction. It is not a prison sentence, lie. It is simply a new state of being. In time, you will come to accept it. Accept it. He let out a bark of laughter, but it was tinged with frustration. I didn't agree to this. Becca stood, stepping toward him. And the moment she did, he felt it. A strange pull in his chest, a deep, undeniable awareness of her presence. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, something primal. His body was already responding to the bond, and that realization made his stomach turn. Agreement is irrelevant, she said softly. The bond exists. Denying it will not change that. Lyle gritted his teeth, forcing himself to push past the unsettling feeling crawling under his skin. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. He had a life, a business, a ship. He couldn't just be tied to some alien woman because of a damn drink. No, he muttered, shaking his head. No way. There's got to be someone who can undo this. A doctor, a scientist, somebody. Becca arched a brow, and for the first time, there was something akin to amusement flickering in those golden eyes. You can try, she said simply, but you will find that what has been done cannot be undone. Lyle didn't wait to argue. He grabbed his clothes, yanking them on as fast as possible, his mind already spinning through possible contacts, black market medics, underground geneticists, anyone who specialized in fixing mistakes. Becca watched him dress, her expression calm but expectant, as if she already knew what he was going to do. I'm leaving, he said firmly, buttoning his shirt and reaching for his boots. I'll figure this out on my own. Becca didn't move, didn't even flinch. Instead, she smiled. Actually smiled, like this was all going exactly as she expected. I'll come with you. Lyle stopped, narrowing his eyes at her. No, you won't. Yes, I will, she said, voice infuriatingly even. The bond will not allow us to be separated for long. If you run, I will find you. If you leave, you will feel the absence, and so will I. It will be painful. You cannot escape me, Lyle. Not truly. His stomach twisted at that, and for the first time, a seed of unease lodged itself deep in his gut. He didn't like feeling trapped. He didn't like the idea that no matter what he did, he might never shake this connection. But what unsettled him most wasn't just the situation itself. It was the way some part of him already knew she was right. Still, he refused to accept it. He grabbed his jacket, storming toward the door. We'll see about that. Becca just smiled again, calm and patient, as if she had all the time in the world. We will. Lyle stepped out into the city, pushing through the neon-lit crowds, his mind laser-focused on one thing: finding a way to break this bond before it broke him. Lyle stormed through the neon-lit streets of Eden Prime, weaving past throngs of travelers, traders, and pleasure-seekers who had no idea that his entire life had just been flipped upside down. His heart pounded with frustration, not just at the situation but at the unnatural pull in his chest that made him painfully aware of Becca following close behind him. She wasn't chasing him, wasn't even trying to keep up. She just was there, moving with an effortless grace that made it seem like she had nowhere else to be. It was infuriating, and he had no idea why it was affecting him this much. He needed answers, a cure, something. His first stop was the Red Sun Clinic, an underground medical facility known for catering to those with unique problems. He shoved past the line of waiting clients and slammed his hands down on the front desk, startling the tired-looking receptionist. "I need to see Dr. Venn. Now." The receptionist barely blinked, her cybernetic eyes adjusting as she scanned him. "Venn's busy." Lyle scowled. "Tell him it's Ly Mercer, and it's urgent." That got her attention. She tapped a few keys, then gestured toward the back. "Room 6. Lyle didn't wait for permission. He pushed through the doors, ignoring the sharp antiseptic smell and the low hum of machinery working on some less-than-legal procedures in the other rooms. Inside, Dr. Venn, a lanky, four-armed alien with too many eyes, looked up from a patient strapped to a gurney. Well, Venn mused, setting down his surgical instrument. "Lyle Mercer, haven't seen you in a while. Let me guess. A bad deal. Someone slipped something into your system. You're dying and need a quick fix." Lyle folded his arms. "Something like that." He jerked his thumb over his shoulder at Becca, who had stepped into the room completely at ease. "She drugged me with some kind of imprinting serum. Says it's permanent. Tell me she's lying." Venn's expression didn't change, which immediately made Lyle uneasy. The doctor simply gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Sit." Lyle hesitated but ultimately dropped into the chair, rolling up his sleeve as Venn reached for a scanning device. The alien's extra hands moved quickly, taking readings, checking vitals, his many eyes narrowing at the results. Lyle waited, every muscle in his body wound tight. Finally, Venn leaned back with a sigh. "She's not lying." Lyle felt his stomach drop. "What?" "The bond is real," Venn said, setting the scanner aside. "Your neurological and biochemical patterns have already begun to sync. Her presence affects you on a subconscious level. The longer you're around her, the stronger it gets." Lyle clenched his fists. "You mean the worse it gets?" Venn gave a humorless chuckle. "Depends on how you look at it." Lyle pushed himself up, pacing. "Come on, Doc. There's got to be a way to undo it. A counter serum, a procedure, something." Venn sighed again, rubbing his temples. "Even if I had the right equipment, which I don't, it wouldn't be a simple fix. The serum isn't just a chemical reaction. It's biological, woven into your DNA now. Separating you two wouldn't just be painful, it could be fatal." Lyle stopped dead in his tracks. "Fatal. For both of you," Venn clarified. "Your body would go into shock. Your nervous system would crash, and your heart could fail. It's not guaranteed, but the risks are high." Lyle swore under his breath, raking his hands through his hair. This was worse than he thought, so much worse. He felt trapped, like the walls were closing in, and when he turned to Becca, he expected to see some kind of smug satisfaction on her face, but there was nothing of the sort. She was just watching him, calm and patient as ever, like she already knew there was no point in fighting this. He refused to accept that. "There has to be another way," Lyle said, barely keeping the desperation out of his voice. "What if we just ignore it? Go our separate ways?" Venn shook his head. "Not an option. The separation sickness would set in fast. It would feel like withdrawal, worse even. Physical pain, emotional instability. It would break you down until you gave in and found each other again." He leaned forward, studying Lyle closely. "The bond isn't just about proximity. It's designed to keep you together." Lyle turned away, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He hated this. He hated feeling like he had no control, like something had been taken from him without his say. He had spent years making sure he never owed anyone anything, that he was the only one in charge of his own fate. And now he was bound to someone forever because of one stupid drink. Becca finally spoke, her voice softer than he expected. "You're fighting something that cannot be changed. Lie." "Why?" Lyle spun on her, eyes burning with frustration. "Because I don't like being told what my future is supposed to be." Silence settled over the room, thick and heavy. Becca just looked at him, her golden eyes unreadable. She wasn't mad. She wasn't gloating. If anything, she looked like she understood, and that made him even more angry. Then exhaled loudly, standing up. "Look, kid, you want my advice. Don't waste your time looking for a fix. Instead, figure out how to live with it." Lyle didn't respond. He couldn't. He just stared at the ground, feeling like the universe had just played the biggest joke on him. Finally, he turned toward the door. "We're done here." Then didn't stop him. He just called after him, "Don't do anything stupid, Mercer." Lyle didn't answer. He just walked out, feeling the weight of Becca's presence behind him every step of the way. Lyle didn't speak as he stepped back out into the neon chaos of Eden Prime, his thoughts a tangled mess of frustration, disbelief, and simmering resentment. The city still pulsed with life, oblivious to the fact that his own had just been thrown into a tailspin. He walked into the Red Sun Clinic expecting an easy fix, some under-the-table cure that would erase this whole mess like a bad hangover. But instead, he was walking out with the reality that this was permanent. His body felt different already, though he hated admitting it. The awareness of Becca's presence wasn't just a mental thing. There was a physical pull, a tether that connected him to her in a way that defied logic. It was like a phantom touch at the edge of his senses, an unspoken reminder that no matter where he went, she would always be there. The idea of someone being that permanently tied to him made his skin itch. Becca, for her part, didn't say much as she followed him through the crowded streets. She wasn't smug, wasn't rubbing it in his face. She just was, moving at an effortless pace beside him, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. That pissed him off even more. He wanted her to be just as shaken by this as he was, wanted her to feel the same sense of loss over the freedom that had been ripped away. But she didn't. She was calm, patient, like someone who had already accepted the inevitable. "I can feel you brooding," she finally said, voice even smooth. Lyle scoffed but didn't look at her. "That's cute. So now I don't even get to have my own damn thoughts." "That's not how it works," she said, sidestepping a group of rowdy tourists as they stumbled out of a bar. "I don't hear your thoughts, but I can feel them. You're radiating frustration like a beacon." Lyle clenched his fists. "Well, excuse me if I'm not thrilled about waking up bonded to a complete stranger." Becca let out a breath, but it wasn't annoyed. It was measured. She wasn't taking the bait, wasn't rising to his frustration, and that somehow made it worse. "I get that you're angry," she said simply. "I'd probably be angry too if I didn't know what this meant." "Oh, I know what this means," Lyle snapped, stopping abruptly. "It means I don't get to make my own choices anymore. It means I don't get to wake up tomorrow and decide who I want to be with, because that choice has already been made for me." Becca finally looked at him, really looked, and there was something unreadable in those golden eyes. "It's not a cage, Lyle," she said softly. "It's a connection. One that, if you stopped fighting it, might actually mean something." Lyle exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You say that like I asked for this." "You didn't," she agreed, tilting her head slightly. "But neither did I." That threw him for a second, enough to make his frustration falter. He had assumed she had planned this, that she had wanted to bind him to her. But if she hadn't, if this hadn't been her intention either, then, "Why the hell are you so calm about it?" he demanded. She sighed, folding her arms, "Because getting upset won't change what's already done. My people have lived with these bonds for generations. We don't see them as mistakes or something to be undone. We see them as a part of the universe's design. Fighting it only makes it harder." Lyle rubbed his temples, feeling a dull headache forming at the base of his skull. "I'm not built like that," he muttered. "I don't just accept things. I can tell." He shot her a glare, but she didn't smirk or mock him. She just stood there, steady as ever, waiting for him to process it all. And the worst part, he could feel her patience, that unwavering certainty that no matter how long he fought this, she would still be there at the end of it. It was maddening. He needed space. He needed a drink. He needed... A sharp, unnatural stillness swept through the crowd, breaking his train of thought. Lyall wasn't the only one who noticed. The streets that had been alive with laughter, shouts, and the steady hum of street vendors suddenly felt off. People moved slower, eyes darting to the sides, shoulders tensing, like animals sensing a predator nearby. Becca shifted beside him, her own posture changing in an instant. "Someone's watching us," she murmured. Lyall had been around enough bounty hunters, mercenaries, and syndicate enforcers to know the feeling of being marked. His instincts were screaming at him now, telling him that they weren't alone. His eyes swept the street, scanning the alleys, the rooftops, the dark corners where shadows stretched just a little too far.